This is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft chocolate, craft beer, and other artisan drinks. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional drinks writer, an advanced cicerone, the author of Pairing Beer and Chocolate, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or on annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. Cacao agronomist Sarah Bharath has become one of my closest friends in the craft chocolate space. We'll hop on a Zoom call that we're expecting to take an hour and end up talking for 3. And we found that you all like to listen to some of those conversations as well. Sarah's been on Bean to Barstool a couple times before, and we spoke recently, had one of these marathon calls where we talked for like 3 hours and found that we had gotten to some really interesting topics. So for the next 2 episodes of Bean to Barstool, I'm going to share a 2-part conversation that Sarah and I had recently. The first part of the conversation that I'm sharing today, we talk all about cacao farming. We look at the opportunities and challenges of the lack of control we have when it comes to farming and fermentation. Talk about the diversity of cacao genetics, about soil health and the soil microbiome. Talk about the pressure for prescriptive farming practices, even on smallholder farms. We talk about the tension within any artisan agricultural field like chocolate, beer, wine, anything else, between predictability and the surprise that we love, the discovery, the tension between consistency and complexity. We love talking about terroir and the variability that comes into farming and fermentation and production years and all sorts of things like that. But consumers like the predictability of knowing what something's going to taste like. And farmers and producers want to know what they're going to be working with year after year. It's a really interesting conversation. I learned a lot from Sarah here, and I think you will as well. So settle in and listen as Sarah Bharath and I talk about all things cacao farming and fermentation. Sarah, welcome back to Bean to Barstool. It's been a little while, and you have been globetrotting as you always are. How have you been?
Oh, David, it's been a long minute. But it's always so good to be here with you. You know, we have our non-recorded chats and exchanges that always keep the embers burning, right? So that's always super encouraging for me, especially, and hopefully for you. But it's really good to finally pin down some quiet time to actually see where we take this next chat.
Yeah, for sure.
Good to be here.
Well, I know you've been bouncing all over, going to different farms and different training sessions and things like that. Why don't you briefly share with us a little bit of what you've been working on recently, and then we can jump into some deeper topics.
Yeah, sure. To be honest, it's not been a whirlwind per se, but it feels like one. I think maybe because I've been running from one series of events to the next, not without great excitement, but also with great need for some downtime and refueling, you know. But I will say that it's been quite a few months of field work, but mainly really a big emphasis on sharing what I've been learning, as well as, more importantly, providing that facilitator role for farmers, chocolate makers, etc., to be at the same, I don't want to say table. In some cases, it's at the same table, but generally much preferred under the same trees to really begin to talk about the topic that, you know, the topics that matter to us all, from the field to that final, you know, flavorful seed that's going to be converted into chocolate and other, cocoa related products, right? Over the time, when was the last time we actually had a recorded session?
I mean, I think it was at least last spring or summer.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're looking at almost smack on 1 year ago. You and I sat down formally have a chat, right? Yeah, and a lot has happened in that time in terms of my field involvements, some of my small scale experiments. I think the thing that I miss and mourn the most in all of this time is that I've not been able to run the size of ferments, as in hot, well-run fermented cacao that, I'm used to, because Trinidad is still seeing, we're still going through quite a rough period, like many other locations in the producing world, where, production is still quite low, and there's not going to be any magic fix, until we address the root cause factors. We're not going to see the needle move in any significant way. And I say that to basically springboard into what I've been focusing a lot on, at least the last year, with a lot of my trainings and conversations and work alongside farmers. It's one thing to talk about processing and the dynamics of processing and all of the beautiful things that happen with processing and don't happen with processing. But if we have no beans to subject to processing parameters, then we've got to be having another kind of conversation and series of actions, to actually begin to address that issue, right? So I've been in no small order, trying to do what I can to create awareness as to how do we begin to ask better questions. I'm not even saying right questions, because as far as I'm concerned, it's not a case of right or wrong questions. It's a case of how do we ask better questions to get to the root cause of the issues that we've been dealing with. And so I've been really, really ramping up the efforts and the volume on focusing on what is happening at field level, and not just what most people are used to, focusing on what they can see above ground. Yeah. We're all rightfully seduced with what we can see above ground. And for a long time in the world that of the microbes, there were many things we couldn't see, there were many things we didn't yet understand. But that is no longer the case. There is, yes, still a lot that we do not understand, a lot that we don't even know we don't know. Okay. A number of things in the plant world, plant physiology, plant interactions with soil, the entire soil multiverse that has been working with plants long before humans came on the scene. We're now getting very, very fascinating windows into things that indigenous communities would have spoken about, they would have worked with in particular ways using very different language. Yeah. And so it's for me and for those in the space who are willing to really finally accept that the plant and soil have always been one. We cannot continue to separate them when we devise, fancy, well-funded projects, all well-intentioned, but we leave the other half, we leave the other partner out of the equation. It's not going to work, and it's gotten us into quite a pickle right now with agriculture across the globe. But we have amazing people doing absolutely incredible research work as well as applied research work together with farmers who are, they're determined to change the narrative with respect to how we've been working in this space. And it's absolutely crucial in the cacao space that we begin to pay more attention. It's not that we haven't been paying attention, but I think there have been a lot of silos, and there continue to be a lot of silos in cacao, especially when it comes to the research, when it comes to the actual actions on the ground tied to that research that's been done. We've been wearing a lot of blinders, and the time to take those off is, well, yeah, it should have happened many, many years ago, but here we are. We have an opportunity to do a number of things now to create, or rather facilitate, very, very powerful change in windows of time that we couldn't even imagine before that we could make these kinds of changes, and this is not, there was a time when I would have said, oh, this is pie in the sky. We're talking about eclectic research and we're hoping that, maybe this could work, and we have to wait on 50 years of research to reveal one little nugget. That's no longer the case, because once we start accepting, because we have recognized at different levels and from different domains, that we absolutely need to look at the fact that everything is connected, and begin to really take a very, very holistic perspective on how we approach cacao, the space in which cacao is grown, what cacao is grown with, and not just companion plants above, but what are the companions down below that are actually supporting this entire collective? Yeah. So for me, it's been at warp speed that I've been going down these rabbit holes, and it's been in yeah, to say that I have not thoroughly enjoyed it's become like a drug to me. I mean, I keep referring to cacao as my gateway plant, right? And there, even when I use that term the first time, I don't think even I knew how much of a gateway plant slash gateway drug chocolate and it's, all the other products that can be made or things that you can consume from cacao fresh, off of the tree, how much of a gateway system this plant actually is to a wider cohort of things that we absolutely need to take the time to understand, because it's been asking us to stop and take the time to understand. And from your, with our conversations behind the scenes, looking at, chocolate, beer, all of the components, all of the plant components that feed into good beer, right? All of the plant components that feed into good chocolate, and bringing those two together, the onus is on us now to pay attention to where's all of this coming from? How is this happening? What is changing? What are we noticing that we don't like anymore? Why is that happening? We can't just toss out, oh, we don't like this particular variety because we've decided carte blanche that it's not a good performer. It doesn't taste good. It doesn't give us all this fine flavor, all these amazing profiles. Why are we pigeonholing things before we understand what they're actually meant to express and provide in the space for humans, and then the wider non-human community? But we're here to, unpack a whole bunch of things, and I think this is gonna probably be a series. This is probably going to be a series of conversations that you and I need to have to unpack for ourselves, for starters, and hopefully, take the listeners along, take the beautiful audience along for just an amazing unveiling journey, because we don't have the answers, but we certainly can ask a bunch of questions that then feed into a whole bunch of exploratory journeys, right? And that's what's actually helped me keep my sanity, because the world is in a very, very intriguing space right now. We're all feeling the pressure in so many different ways and shared ways, and I think it's going to be challenges on different levels for all of us. But for me, at least, working with the plant now and plant soil world, recognizing that, one, we're not alone. Two, it's never as desperate as we think it is. And there are always going to be lessons from that non-human space that remind us of the fact that the solutions are right within the challenges. But we've got to calm down. That line that says, keep calm and carry on. There's a lot that we need to unpack. It's not just a nice hashtag or whatever. It's asking us to really simplify, to amplify what needs to be amplified in the space. And this is one of the things that I love with the work that both you and I are doing. We're helping ourselves to understand, and in that journey, we're taking folks along with us and enjoying the ride, and helping to peel back some layers that'll help in corners that we may never know about, So it's really, really good to be here with you, David. It's been too long.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think the word intriguing is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence about where the world is. That's a generous euphemism.
Generous, indeed, indeed.
Let's drill down into some more maybe concrete specifics to unpack what we're actually talking about here. So when we're looking at
Sure.
something like chocolate, any consumer packaged good, especially consumable, the premium is going to go on consistency and predictability. The consumer wants to know what they're getting when they
Yes,
buy something, which means the producer wants to know what their ingredients and their inputs, wants consistency there and wants to be able to know exactly what they're getting, which means all of that rolls
precisely.
back downhill to the farmer and to the processor, to growing and harvesting the cacao and then fermenting it.
Bingo.
And
Hmm.
at that spot, those controls kind of fragment a little bit because we're dealing with an agricultural, a biological series of processes here that we can put parameters around but cannot ultimately control as of yet. Let's talk a little bit about that end of the process and kind of that loss of control. What is it that you're seeing at the
Hmm.
farm level, or maybe not loss of control, but the impossibility of control in some ways at the farm level? What are some of the things you're seeing and how that's playing out?
We'll be right back.
Are you passionate about beer, dreaming of crafting the perfect brew? Cincinnati State's Brewing Science program is here to make that dream a reality. Imagine learning from some of the best in the world. Their faculty are seasoned pros with years of experience in the beer industry. You'll get hands-on training in their in-campus brewing lab, turning classroom concepts into award-winning creations. Cincinnati State offers an associate degree and several specialized certificates to tailor your education to your career goals. Whether you're just starting out or looking to deepen your expertise, they've got you covered. And they know life is busy. That's why their in-person classes are held in the evenings, perfect for those with full-time day jobs. And with some of their courses offered entirely online, you can brew up your future without being on campus every day. When you finish the program, their strong connections with local breweries mean you'll be set up for success in the job market. Make a choice for your future today. Visit cincinnati-state.edu/brewing for more information.
Okay, so in terms of broad strokes, um, I can see that, okay, we've come from highly diverse systems in many of our, at least smallholder. Let me qualify, make sure I set the boundaries there. The smallholder farms generally tend to be a whole lot more diverse than, let's say, large scale industrial plantings, right? The dynamic is very different, and there will be many who will argue that it's not possible to do these things at large scale with the kind of diversity that we're talking about, right? In terms of above ground diversity. And this is where I think, just as a little bit of a segue here, but still related, I think because we've been so obsessed with what we're seeing above ground and this diversity speak above ground, the big guys, the large scale plantings, have either lost sight of or never had in the line of sight what is really going on down below that's supporting what's above, to be able to find solutions for the context in which they're in. It's never going to be perfect, okay? But nature has found a way to do things at large scale, at scale that we cannot even begin to comprehend, but it is doing it in how should I put it? I don't even know the word. It's doing it in small, I guess, circles. Essentially, even though things are being done at ginormous scales, nature is showing how. I'm going to show you how to do this at large scale, but you have to pay attention to the micro before you go into the macro, okay? Understand the principles of the processes, and upscaling will become, the sustainable upscaling will become evident. But when we live in a system where it's all about limitless growth and we're not paying attention to the natural principles, of course something is going to give. We're busy walking a plank here that we do not understand, right? But we have the power to understand if we're willing to stop and take stock, or even slow down and take stock of what we've been doing, okay? And what's been found by those who have been stopping, pausing, and taking stock to help inform the rest of us, okay? So at field level, I can tell you, let me speak about the Caribbean context, because that's the one I'm most familiar with, and especially the Trinidadian context, right? Most of our farms are smallholder farms, okay? And so traditionally, conventionally, we've had scenarios where these cacao trees are intercropped with at least 3 to 4 other distinct not varieties, species, okay?
Sketch for us like what size we're talking about when we say smallholder, like roughly what upper limit
Okay,
would you put on that?
right. So, okay, great. So most of the farms really don't exceed in terms of functional cacao cultivation. Okay, so let me start with general farm size. That may or may not be covered entirely in cacao. You may have a range of 20 to 30 acres. Okay, what's that in hectares? Take it down, let's say 2.2 or two, or roughly two and a half. Okay, it'll be in hectares. But many of the farms that I have worked with, the effective cacao cultivation is no more than, let's say, 5 hectares. It may be even smaller. Okay,
Okay.
it could be half that. If we're honest about the cacao that is actually being worked on the land. Okay, there are some with much larger estates, but when we talk about what is actually producing the bulk of the cacao that they're able to extract, that they're able to functionally work with, it's usually much smaller than the actual farm size. Okay, but I want to also reiterate that on most, if not all of our farms, we have scenarios where it's intercropped with a number of different different kinds of plants and representing different families. And I'm saying this specifically now, the fact that they're coming from different families for a very, very important reason. The research has been showing for many, many, many years, we're talking about double-digit years now, that the having not just multi-species, because I can have different species of, let's say, Theobroma growing in a space, okay? Or different species of Musa growing in that space, okay? These are bananas, okay? Or different types of citrus growing in that space. But it's still a monoculture of cacao or monoculture of bananas or monoculture of citrus. We're still within the same family, yes? What the research has been showing is that if you want to increase the effective functioning of a biological planted system, having at least 4 to 6 members from different families actually increases the microbial diversity in that space. And you're increasing the functional microbial diversity in a way that allows cooperation and collaboration. Essentially, what they found in terms of that functional microbial diversity across multifamily plants is that there is tremendously increased cooperation and collaboration, especially in resource limiting scenarios. So whereas we probably as humans, our way of seeing and working in the world right now, we seem to think that, okay, your family, as in you're related to me, so I'm more likely to share resources with you. Yes, especially when things get a little bit difficult. But what they're recognizing with the unseen world, yes, the micro world, is that actually that's not what's happening. When you are related, especially the more closely related I am to you, I'm less likely to share resources with you, especially in times of need. Where you are completely, the microbiome of the cacao is different from the microbiome of the banana, of the citrus, of the annona species, of the, all these different families that we normally would have had planted in typical Caribbean home gardens and on farms. There was a natural diversity that was encouraged in cultivated spaces in our Caribbean islands because you needed to feed yourself, your family, your community. So you encourage many different kinds of things to have a very diverse diet, diverse options for sale or trade. Yes? But we have systematically, for a number of reasons, we have systematically reduced the number of different families that are represented on our farms to the point where we're almost at monoculture with cacao. Okay? So the cacao might be more let's say it may have more as a companion plant, a whole bunch of weeds that the farmer is in a constant fight with to try to control, because the thinking is, and there is there is very much some truth to this. The trees and grasses do not do well together. They do not. Primarily because we understand now that grasses bacterial dominant spaces will encourage the growth of grasses and what we would generally consider your weeds, okay?
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, you may have noticed things in the world aren't awesome right now, and social media kind of reflects that. I built a lot of the following for Bean to Barstool and just for my own writing career on Instagram, but I've been getting significantly lower returns in terms of engagement on Instagram, and well, some of their recent changes don't have me thrilled for the future. So, here are some ways to keep up with Bean to Barstool if Instagram and other social media platforms don't prove to be long-term viable solutions. If you do nothing else, sign up for the Bean to Barstool newsletter. You can do that by going to beantobarstool.com/newsletter-signup. That link is in the show notes. That is a weekly email newsletter that covers all the same things we cover here on the podcast. Speaking of, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Wherever you listen to Bean to Barstool, go there and subscribe to make sure you get notifications of new episodes. If you're a proud millennial like me and you still use an RSS feeder, you can also subscribe to our blog posts, which come out at least weekly. Also, if you are still on social media but don't love Meta right now, you can check me out over on Blue Sky. I'm on there under my personal account at David Nilsson Beer, but I do post all the Bean to Barstool content over there as well. Finally, if you want to get in touch with me directly, you can email beantobarstool@gmail.com. I am not leaving Instagram anytime soon, but these are great ways to make sure you can keep up with what I have going on. Stay safe and take care of each other.
Trees, especially perennials like cacao, they do not like bacterial-dominated spaces because they cannot function in bacterial-dominated spaces. Bacterial-dominated spaces tend to have more compacted soils, and with compacted soils, you tend to have all of the knock-on effects of reduced aeration in the soil, reduced water entry into the soil, reduced root room in the soil, and those are three huge levers for plant survival, because the roots are where all of the action is at. You're dealing with the air interface, you're dealing with the water interface. And if that is troubled in any form or fashion to any degree, you're talking about compromising what can happen above. You're talking about compromising this plant's ability to build itself with a level of integrity in that structure that then will allow it to actually reproduce. Okay, it's not reproducing out of, magic formulae. All of this has a process or a series of processes that lead to the final production of fruit. And in all of this now, we have the microbiomes that are above and below. The leaves are covered in their own microbiome. The microbiome is on the leaves, in the leaves. It's on the stems, in the stems, on the trunks, in the trunks, on the flowers, in the flowers, on the seed, in the seed, okay? On the roots, in the roots. So we're talking about a level of colonization, constructive, beneficial colonization, not what happens with human colonization, right? Okay? This kind of colonization actually understands how to work for the benefits of itself and the collective, the wider collective, right? And so what I've been noticing on our farms in the region, because we have been so entrenched over at least 2 generations, how we need to work with the land in a particular way, especially as it concerns agrochemicals, right? Because this is where the nuclear bombs continue to be dropped. We're systematically reducing diversity to work more efficiently with just two crops, banana intercropped with cacao, cacao intercropped with banana, okay? Notice we've already effectively reduced the biological diversity that is going to be in that space by way of the plants and then by way of the community, the microbial community that's supporting these two plants coming from different families and different species, okay? So we've reduced above ground, we've reduced below ground. We have scenarios where now because of how we've chosen to work with the land, we are in a crazy, crazy cycle of adding fuel to the fire, where we're recommending to farmers, or the industry has been recommending to farmers in different forms and fashions, well, you can use this particular chemical to get rid of your weeds. And when they say that this chemical is only designed to get rid of, remove from the system, that particular grass, they're asking them if they've done any microbial studies. You're going to get blank looks, because they're after killing this particular plant. They're not interested in what else is being taken down. They're going to say, oh, it's not going to affect the cacao. It's not going to affect the cacao directly. What it does indirectly is basically drop the nuclear bomb on the community that supports cacao. And so there's the knock-on effect of it can't get the nutrients, the herbicides, the fungicides, all of these things that we're advised as a farming population to put into the space to ensure that we control the weeds, get a better crop, protect your crop from the fungal diseases, because, all fungi seem to be bad, all bacteria are bad, all viruses are bad. So there's this paradigm there are these paradigms under which many of us have been born into. I was born into it, I grew up thinking this is how we need to grow plants, not recognizing that, wait a minute, there's this whole other way that nature has been showing us for millions of years. Where did that go? Who's fertilizing naturally growing things? Who's putting in leguminous plants to, basically help provide nitrogen in the system? How is the system actually designed to work versus how we say we want the system to work? Yeah. And so we've actually been putting the proverbial axe to the trees in such powerful and detrimental and lightning speed ways that it's when you finally begin to see how it's designed to function versus what we've been doing, David, to use the word sobering it doesn't even begin to encompass what you actually begin to see and feel when you recognize that we've been on this hamster wheel to nowhere, and with just increasing speed. Yeah. So on the farms, I've seen just the massive decline in diversity above and below ground, because now I have the ability to actually, with the various instruments that have been beautifully developed over many, many years by all of these incredibly curious researchers who were not credentialed, right? But then, it was built on by those in the research world to refine the technology. We have a window into the microscopic world like we've never had before. And so it's given me a chance to see what is going on at subterranean level, at the quote unquote feet of these plants, right? What is really going on when we're in a healthy system versus an unhealthy system? Who is there? And more importantly, who is not there? Who's supposed to be there to help the system run a particular way that I'm not finding in a diseased system, that I'm not finding in a system that is heavily blasted with high analysis fertilizers, not heavily blasted with fungal treatments, with bacterial, antibacterial products, right? We've become such experts at just, ghost busting that we're zapping from top to bottom, right? And I've been able to begin to look at the patterns that are emerging now in diseased systems, where you recognize that all of the underground workforce has been traumatized, if not outright destroyed. So you cannot have functional, healthy, highly productive systems above. And this has a direct knock-on effect with flavor and flavor expression. And as I always say in my trainings, farmers are very used to me saying this now. You can have the Mercedes-Benz or the Audi or the BMW version of plant genetics in cacao. If those genetics are not coupled to or coupled with the right enabling community in that space, starting with the microbes, and the microbes will be encouraged because of the kinds of diverse multi-family plantings that we have in the space, it means we're we're working just to work. We're not going to get the juice for the squeeze that we would like. And the kind of squeeze that we're putting on the system now, there's no more juice. There's no more juice. There's no jug. There's nothing. There's
So
absolutely nothing.
what does that actually translate to as a consequence, as empirical consequences, either at the agronomic level or you've mentioned the flavor level? Like, what do we actually see as consequences when we are reducing the complexity of these systems?
What we're seeing now, a major drop in production, massive, massive, unexpected in inverted commas, drop in production across the globe. And the drop in production, there will be several factors that may be similar across all locations. And then there will be other influencing factors that are very unique to the location. So it's what we would consider situational complexity. Yeah. So you will have those location specific factors, but they are when you go down to the first principles of how this crop prefers to be grown, what does it need to do its best? Yes, there are commonalities across all the growing zones that need to be satisfied. And those common problems are they're at the root cause of what we're seeing. Yeah. So drop in production, definitely hugely influenced by what we're seeing in the environment at the micro and macro, the micro leading to the macro level. Yeah. And then, of course, with the knock on, with that lowered production, whatever you're actually getting, as I think I mentioned to you in one of our prior conversations, I started seeing in 2020 some very, very, very dramatic shifts in the behavior of the fermentation masses at different locations. And some locations, it's actually more acute than others. In some, for example, where we would have almost textbook perfect fermentations run over, let's say, 6 to 7 days, I had to be nursing ferments to 12, 13 days just to be able to get some semblance of the endpoint indicators. It was not ideal. It could not be ideal because it did not start well. It cannot end well if it didn't start well. And where, like you rightfully said, I really wanted to write down, I get started to scribble while you were saying it because you put it so beautifully. We can put parameters around these things, how we want to run this ferment. How do we want to, get certain flavor profiles out of these beans? But in the end, as humans, as processors, we need to understand that we are in control of nothing. Even when you have commercial starter cultures, that's another scenario where the diversity of the cultures has been so severely intentionally reduced to be able to extract what we want. In our drive to extract what we want from the system and from the starting material, we have lost all sight of why that diversity and the redundancy that is built into diversity, what it's actually helping us to accomplish. So yes, the consumers want to get the same flavor profiles, bar after bar, season after season, year after year. But this is where now the education of all the masses involved in production all the way to consumption and back again, we have got to get everybody on board with how does this actually work? Our industrial methods of producing chocolate and every other food that's industrially produced, it's been catering towards very standardized flavors, tastes, colors, etc. And we've become so complacent with that we've missed the boat entirely on what are the downstream implications of this standardization? What are the downstream implications for our ability to not only appreciate at an aesthetic level why this diversity exists, but this diversity is existing for also very deeply functional reasons. Our standardization of food, our standardization of flavors has cut so many other dimensions out of what is actually health promoting and life-giving that we now find ourselves in a pickle with the standardization has brought us to the brink of collapse, both as humans with respect to our own health statuses, as well as the ability of the systems that support us, the ability of those systems to continue supporting us. So we're seeing the consequences of many, many collective actions that have been taken over, some can argue, a very long period of time. We can also say some things have happened in a very short period of time. But coming back to something I said earlier, with the solutions lying within the challenges, we're actually recognizing now that the very things that the problems that we have created, that those systems have been giving us, and they continue to give us these signposts as to how to actually undo, so that we can restore functionality both within the human at a psychological and physiological level, all the way back to the systems, the land that is supporting us and everything in between, So that's what life also shows us. These organisms are so tiny and they're so powerful. We need to take some lessons from that. It's the small actions collectively that are going to make a difference, but we have to be willing to start, and it's going to start. It can, and it is happening in tiny pockets, in small villages, on small farms, with small groups. I see it every time I do trainings. The knowledge and the expertise, they're there. They're in country. They're in tiny spaces. They're in spaces where the folks are not credentialed, but the intelligence is presenting itself in a different way that allows it to be used and really, really well leveraged in that space. So the alphabet soup titles are one dimension, but we have to recognize that the intelligences, they're manifested and really showcased in very, very different ways in the locations where they're meant to be manifested in a particular way, but still be able to give us very, very valuable results to restore what's going on with our farms, to improve what's going on with production, to give us a chance to work with ferments the way we're used to working with ferments. You know what I'm saying? And not have to think about, I have to police this with all of these fancy data loggers. And, I need to be managing, figuring out what's going on with moisture levels at this root using this fancy piece of machinery that costs over $1,000 US. I mean, we've really put a lot of things out of the hands of those who have that knowledge to work with the land at a cellular level, based on sensory guidance, based on just that innate understanding and that willingness to observe. That's one of the things that has been coming out a whole lot in the training sessions that I've been facilitating, because I'm not here as a lecturer, I'm not here as a teacher, I'm here as a student as well. And so when I facilitate these sessions, I have the privilege and the honor of seeing so much knowledge and hearing so much local traditional knowledge come out into the space. And when it's brought under the same trees with so many different personalities, it becomes greater than the sum of the parts that we represent. And so we're seeing a huge, huge shift in small spaces of the mindsets that, all of us are able to come to that space with, the paradigms, recognizing the paradigms under which we've been working with the land, working with the plants, to now actually create something different. And it's deeply rewarding, David. Let me tell you, it's deeply rewarding. So I'll have very long, exhausting days, but I can tell you, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Sure.
I really, really wouldn't.
Just to back up a bit, I mean, so you're saying that the challenges that we're currently seeing in the cacao market globally, with drops in production and corresponding increases in cost, you think is directly attributable to this reduction in biological diversity at the farm level?
Yes, because all of it is tied to fertility of the soil, fertility of the systems. If the systems are not fertile, you can't get the kind of production that you want. So yes, we may have, for example, we have macroclimatic changes that are dramatically affecting certain areas. So lowered rainfall in some parts, increased rainfall in some parts. So you have drought in some locations, you have extreme flooding in some locations. But when you begin to go back to, where does this all begin and where does it, I don't want to say end, because it's a cycle, okay? When you begin to understand how much soil and soil aggregation actually influences climate, a lot of conversations begin to change, okay? We've been, and we continue to be, obsessed with carbon and carbon dioxide as, the major contributor to, global warming. And we're not saying no. There is the evidence that it is contributing. But one of the things that has really blown my mind is the body of evidence from very, very well-established researchers who have been saying, can we please also look at water and water vapor? Because we have so much more water in the atmosphere than we have had in the past. And water vapor is actually helping to trap way more heat in the the above ground environment than we have been taught to actually consider. Okay, just think about anyway, I'm not going to go into the physics of it because it's going to go down another rabbit hole, but I'm putting this out there because I want us to actually begin to look beyond the almost maniacal obsession with carbon dioxide and methane and all of that as these holy grail contributors to climate change. It's never one-dimensional. There are many other things contributing, and every contributor counts, yes. But when we begin to look at what water and water vapor in the atmosphere have actually been doing, we begin to ask now, so wait a minute, why is there so much water vapor in the atmosphere? Why are we having so much evaporative loss? Why are we experiencing such chronic droughts, increasing droughts in areas that never saw that kind of thing before? And it comes back down to soil aggregation, and soil aggregation can only happen with the involvement of microorganisms. It cannot happen with any form of tillage, any form of mechanical working of the soil. There may be some temporary changes, but in terms of lasting changes, the soil science and the soil microbiological science now, so bringing the biology back to where it belongs together with the chemistry and the physics of how soil actually is designed to function, we're recognizing that without these microorganisms that are coupled to their plant partners, we cannot get good aggregation, which means we cannot get good air spaces, we can't get good water infiltration spaces, we cannot get good root room spaces, okay? And if water cannot percolate, if the water cannot infiltrate down, where is it going to go? Sideways. And if it has to go sideways within the first inch or even the first millimeter, it means we're talking about massive erosion. What are we seeing planet-wide? Erosions, crazy floods. It's moving with land. It's like the earth is saying, you know what, this is no longer functional. I'm starting to shave back. But in shaving back, in some locations, we're seeing that shaving, taking it down almost to parent rock. Okay, and that is not a good thing when we're trying to raise crops and we're trying to build communities around these locations, right? And the crops that we want to grow on these locations. Conversely, you have the scenarios where you have way, way more precipitation taking place, and that precipitation cannot enter. It's coming down so fast and so furious, and the land itself is not poised to absorb the bulk of it like a sponge and then allow that to filter down to aquifers and then get out to rivers. It's just a mad surface flow. It's a quick race to the bottom, okay, on all levels. So yes, when you actually begin to unpack, and this is why I'm very, very adamant about why, that question, why. You keep asking why and answering why until you get to a point where you cannot go any further with that question why, you would have identified the root cause of the issue. And that is what we're seeing in the space now when we begin to look at the cultivated and non-cultivated spaces as a system versus as pieces that have just been put together in this very mechanistic format that are meant to work linearly. That's not how life works. And the sooner we come to terms with that, the sooner we, as the locals, as we would say in the Caribbean, as soon as you make peace with that, you actually begin to see the solutions step by step. This is not rocket science, but we have to be willing to actually, recognize that we don't know what we don't know and that we need to learn from others. Again, it comes back to community, just like with the soil systems, just like with the plant the above ground systems, community matters because every member of the community is going to have a perspective that is important to bring together to basically remember the whole that is the system. Yeah.
Let's get back to the specifics then of cacao. We've alluded to fermentation a couple times here, and I know obviously we've been talking about microorganisms. The difference between growing and harvesting cacao and then fermenting that cacao are really two different areas of expertise and two different sciences, even though they're continuations. And often it's the same folks, if this is being done at the farm, who are needing to master both of them. On the side of fermentation, this being a biological process and it being a process that's dependent upon temperature and moisture and all these different environmental inputs, obviously this is going to be a flexible process as those things change, whether because of human intervention or just environmental changes.
Mm-hmm.
Once that fruit comes off the plant, the desire to get that thing to a place where it can start making money is, that pressure is increasing. And so you want to be able to dial that process in, and you want to be able to say, this is exactly what I need to do to make this a profitable product.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said.
But that's not possible because we're dealing with, again, a biological process here. So talk a little bit about how you see that pressure manifest, farmers wanting to be able to know exactly what they need to do, or whoever is going to be processing the cacao knowing exactly what they need to do to get a bean that's ready to make chocolate with. What are you seeing there? And is this a thing that can be dialed in the way that we're wanting to see it dialed in?
Oh, yeah. Okay. My optimistic answer is yes, it can be dialed in, but it's never going to be dialed into a full-on, we can just follow these 10 steps and hit that mark every single time. Again, coming back to what you rightfully said, this is a highly biological dynamic process. And we're not only speaking to or about the organisms for this process. For this process to take place and give the kind of end product that we desire as the consumers, there has to be human intervention. I know they'd love, I have several farmers who would love to have drones and, robots doing all of this. But in the end, there's something about the human combination in this system that is like the key in the ignition. As you said before, we can put parameters around the processes, and we can begin to manage the processes in a particular way, but ultimately we are not in the driver's seat. We are subject to what that recalibration, all of the recalibration that is going to happen in that system, because we're talking about basically millions of players, of tiny drivers, tiny engineers, tiny bioelectricians who are doing what needs to be done in that space based on, as you rightfully said, they will have specific temperature needs, or at least temperature range needs. They will have pH, so acidity of the system needs, okay? Some will be able to function under the high acidity of the pulp, the citric acid that is in the pulp. That citric acid can sometimes be at like 3 to 3.5 on the pH scale, okay? Most organisms in the fermentation system are not prepared to function at that level. And this is where now we see, when we look at what is understood with fermentation science, at least currently, the yeasts that are going to be dominating that mass when you first bring those fresh, clean, great fruity smelling beans, nice white pulpy beans into that fermentation vessel, or if you're doing it in a heap, however your fermentation, whatever the execution method, the point is you are basically aiming to create an enabling environment for those organisms to get to work, okay? So I love the way you said it. The pressure is on once that fruit is ready to get that fruit to X location, or get those seeds, more importantly, extracted from that fruit as quickly as possible, and then taken to the fermentation location, okay, which may be not at the actual tree, the actual farm location, it may be taken to another location where you actually have the fermentation facility, okay? And that brings into play its own dynamics because you're talking about time between extraction in the field and then getting to fermentation facility versus I'm extracting in the field and I'm running that fermentation directly in the field. There are many, many things that have to happen very differently if I'm running a field-based ferment, whether it's a heap or I have my boxes sited in that field to run the ferment under those trees, or at least nearby, versus I have to carry this material now using a vehicle or human or other animal transport. I need to take it to another facility where it's safer because we have, with the prices of cacao now, there's a lot of theft happening in different producing countries. That has taken the risk factor to near heart attack levels because you have in some countries where pods are being stolen off of trees, or you've harvested, you're ready to actually extract your beans the next day and the pod heap is stolen. Or you extract your beans, you put your beans to drain according to recommended processes based on, who you've had helping to inform you, or you're self-taught and you realize that you need to pre-drain your beans before you put it into the fermentation system. You run the risk of, in some countries, those lots of beans, wet beans, are going to be stolen because the price is so high and there's always somebody who's going to buy.
What's happening at that point? Are they just being taken to,
they're going to be sold.
Center and
they're going to be sold to someone who's prepared to process them without passport information, right? Where are these coming from? Is this legit your farm, your beans? I've been seeing it in several locations and it's really devious. In some cases, no, they prefer that all the work be done and they steal the dried beans. So it's everything from beans are being smuggled in bags across borders, okay? Sometimes entire container loads are stolen en route to shipping locations, okay? So we're talking about major risks that did not exist, at least not in the frequency that they exist now, that are just completely it's taking stress to the next level for the farmer, right? So anyway, circling back to, you get these pods off of the trees. Ideally, you're working with getting these pods off the trees at what we would consider as optimal ripeness as possible, based on your context. And I say that because for some farms, if they, for example, like in Trinidad, many of the islands in the Caribbean, here in Jamaica, where I am right now, in Grenada, where I was just last week, you have scenarios where if you leave that fruit to basically get to what we consider optimal ripeness, to be able to get access to maximum sugars in that pulp, the rats, the squirrels, there are other wild animals, some cases monkeys, that will get to it before you, because they also are clued into the signals that this is ready, this is going to be beautifully sweet, and we're going to take it before you. So you run the risk of losing your crop having waited. So on some farms, we cannot have a conversation about you need to wait until it's fully ripe on the tree to then harvest it. They have got to harvest it a bit earlier when there's lower likelihood that the animals are going to get it first, okay? And you bring that harvested material into, or you protect it in the field such that it can go through its own ripening after it's been harvested, because you do want to get to that maximum level of sugar. But that's provided the farmer and the farm labor that he may or may not have can actually accommodate that kind of temporary storage. Yes? So if they're not able to store to allow some ripening to continue and sugar breakdown to basically build the glucose levels in that pulp, if the logistics say that they cannot do that, they're going to basically extract seeds that have a much lower fermentable sugar level. And that creates its own challenge now for what is going to happen in that fermentation mass, which ultimately is going to have a knock-on effect with respect to what flavor precursors can actually be formed, what flavors coming from the microbial fermentation side of things can actually be infused into those beans during the process. You realize we have a million unplanned experiments happening at the same time, and the farmer has no control over this. He or she can only control what they can see and it's subject to the conditions under which they need to work. So let's say my farm, I've been able to, over the years, build quite a reputation of, very well fermented, and the chocolate makers love the flavor profiles, and I've been able to get a level of consistency that is just spot on. It's not going to be exactly the same flavor profiles, for example. They're not going to get the honey note this season, but they may get a jasmine or a blueberry note. But the point is, they're getting some interesting fruities. They're getting the good base chocolate, and they may get some florals, and they're happy with that because they found a way to market the chocolate based on, let's say, harvest or seasonal impacts and what they're able to get out in the chocolate making process, right? But at the end of the day, they've gotten a high quality bean that is showcasing a range of flavors together with a good solid base chocolate that's nice and clean and it's enjoyable, okay? But enter micro and macroclimatic changes. I may be having challenges on my farm because the surrounding farms have, they've decided to completely cut everything. They've gone into short cropping. So they've removed all of the fruit trees for the animals that were never a problem on my farm. Okay, so now the squirrels, the monkeys, the rats they didn't just decide to invade. They're coming there because there's food on my farm. There's no food, and there may be no habitat for them on the other farms now because the human pressure has driven them to where they see a bit of an oasis. So now I have to deal with the consequence of I cannot leave that fruit on the tree to get to that ripe status that the expert told me it needs to be this percentage color change, etc., so that I know the sugar levels are much higher, blah, blah, blah. I have to now scramble to get that harvest off the tree to try to protect those pods and probably take them through what we call pod resting or pod storage so that I can encourage some kind of maturation and increase the availability of those fermentable sugars to try to have a decent ferment. But I'm telling you, based on experience, ever since my cocoa research academic days to now, when you run ferments with cacao seeds that are the fermentable sugar levels are much lower than what should be for that variety. The flavor profile shifts, the fermentation dynamics shift. I have to manage that ferment with a lot more care. I have to be really spot on with, paying attention to temperatures, paying attention to aromas coming off of that process. I have to pay attention to break down products in terms of, is this pulp decomposing? Is it being degraded the way it needs to be degraded in the time frame that it needs to be degraded? Because once you change the food matrix, it means you change who is going to be dominant at X time in that mass. So I will not be able to necessarily follow the protocol that might have been beautifully worked out for my ferments under X conditions. Now parameters have changed, and so my protocol has to change, which means the flavor, what I'm going to be able to get out of it is going to change, and I have no control over that. What I can control is that I produce a food-safe product that is ready for market. Yeah, but I have no control over what is going to be released by way of flavor precursors, what has been infused into those beans as part of the fermentation aromas, okay? And then the chocolate maker, depending on how they choose to roast those beans, they can now bring very, very different things, wildly different things out of the same batch of beans, depending on their roast profiles. Yeah. So it's when we talk about consistency in cacao and flavor for chocolate, for me, we have to have a completely different conversation. And we've known this for a while. Craft chocolate basically called that into the space. It laid bare the fact that the kind of consistency that we say we want, we now need to educate ourselves on what is actually possible and then begin to embrace the diversity that is being revealed by all of the permutations and the combinations that are thrown at the farmers and the processors now.
I would say possible and also desirable. And I think this is one of the uncomfortable tensions of artisan food and beverage is that anytime you are looking at a consumer packaged good, predictability is like I said earlier, you put a premium on this. You want to be able to say this is exactly what this is going to taste like, and the customer wants to know it's going to taste like the last time they had it. But
Yes.
one of the very things that makes us fall in love with wine or chocolate or any of these things is its very unpredictability, is its variability. We're fascinated by the fact of terroir. We don't understand what it is necessarily. We know it's a cool word, but we like the idea of it. Like we like the idea that we get these agricultural, romantic, agrarian images in our head and all that, and we fall in love with the romance of the unpredictability, but then we want that exact same thing the next time. And you're engineering for a thing that actually strips part of the appeal out of the good.
Yes, exactly. Exactly so. And the thing is, David, one of the more powerful things that I've had to sit with is our collective loss of understanding or knowledge, or we just didn't know that it's not just meant to be flavorful and pleasurable. It's that way to help us get things in our system that are actually good for us. But because of how we've standardized and we've gone after just the seduction of the senses, we have completely and systematically removed the element of food being not just flavorful and a source of energy, but it's meant to be information for the body. Because this is not just built without a deep, deep innate intelligence of how certain things are supposed to work. When you eat that nondescript, no, I'm not going to call brand names, but when you eat that particular food that, oh my goodness, it tastes like, I'm going to use a Caribbean reference now because I actually was, anyway, I was going to go down a line there with these flavor wheels that provide very global north references for what I should be tasting. And I don't know what, let's say, strawberries really taste like, especially if they're grown fresh on farm with beautiful, healthy soil. The flavor of that strawberry is going to be very different from the refrigerated container farming strawberry that I may be getting in Trinidad that just tastes acidic and awful. I just know it has a texture and it looks like strawberry. But my reference point, so like for you guys in the global north who may have never had a real farm-grown avocado, or a classic for us is the mango or citrus. When you taste citrus coming from a field that is well taken care of, not just where it originated, right? Because it can come from where it's originated and it still tastes bad because of the farming practices, right? It still tastes empty. Let's just say that. It's not as flavor packed. It's not as nutrient packed. It's not an experience to remember when you have that citrus or that mango or that peach. Yeah, we have and sensory science, I understand it's a beautiful field, but it's been so leveraged for the sake of industry and the seduction of the masses to say this smells and tastes like mango, but it's mango number 45. What is that, right? My body, my tongue says okay, so let's start with the odor side of things first, because we'll smell before we eat, right? And we're seduced by the bright color. Oh my goodness, this looks amazing. And I connect that to an association I've had with, let's say, mangoes that I ate in the tropics. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be so amazing. And then you put it in your mouth and you're like, what? One, the texture is off, because texture is going to be tied to the nutrients that were accumulated to build the structure that makes that texture, okay? Then the flavor is like, what is with all this water? Where's that thick, creamy, juicy, sweet, but not like sickening, enter chemical name of sugar substitute here, type of sugar in my mouth, right? I know my senses are saying, oh my God, this tastes sweet and it reminds me of, but that's where the buck stops. It reminds me of. When it gets into your gut, where it's designed to be unpacked, and basically begin to provide the fuel that the body needs, but also the food for the microbiome that is in your gut that is meant to synthesize other things that our body needs that we can't synthesize, that then feeds to other parts of the body to inform X location, this is what needs to happen, or provide this building block in that location to help the brain do what needs to be done, or your feet or your nervous system do what needs to be done. It's a whole domino effect now of, oh my God, that tasted great. But I know it's just garbage in my system because the information now has not been transferred with that amazing synthetic flavor or that reduced flavor that is coming from what I think is a real fruit, but it's not real fruit, And when marketing is brilliant. It's brilliant, and it has done so much to destroy our appreciation of what the diversity of foods, diversity of flavors, the surprise, this tastes like this season, and it tastes like that the next season, but we still know it's a mango. You know what I'm saying? We still know that it's good for us, and we can enjoy it because eating food, as I'm sure you know, living in North America, food has been hijacked, and eating food has become such a landmine for so many people now, because it's like, even with the organic, oh my God, what is organic? Organic defined by whom, based on what? Is it organic on paper? Is it organic on the land where the industry says, well, you can use this particular organically certified product that let's say the International Cocoa Organization says you're allowed to use it. Okay? Why are we allowed to use it? What is it doing in the system? How is it organic? And just because something may be natural doesn't mean that it's safe. Okay? So when folks say, especially farmers, when they tell me, they repeat the spiel, God bless their hearts, they repeat the spiel that they got from the agribusiness agent, the salesman, or they heard it from another farmer who has already been seduced by the agri salesman, right? No, you need to use this because it's organic. See, it says on the label here, it's organic. And I'm like, okay, what's the active ingredient? Okay, it was naturally extracted from X, Y, and Z. So let's look at the neonicotinoids coming from, let's say, tobacco. Hugely powerful compounds, but massively dangerous if you don't understand the quantities and the frequencies with which you need to use them. Yes? So natural, organic doesn't necessarily mean safe. We have to understand the boundaries with which certain things need to be used, how, when, where, and more importantly, why are we using them? What is dysfunctional in the system that needs to be addressed so that we don't need to use these products, packaged or otherwise? Yeah? So this is why I said to you, going back to why is this happening? But why is that happening? And why do we have to have this when we can have that? You start going down that ladder of why. I'm not going to use climbing the ladder because we want to get right back to the ground, okay? Because all of this is starting in the soil. When we begin to help each other understand based on the science that is coming forward now to help explain what indigenous and traditional knowledge has been saying all along in different forms and fashions, we bring the two together. We actually begin to see very clearly what can be done at farm scale using what the farmers actually already have. And this is one of the things that came out so clearly in our last 2 days here in Jamaica, in Portland, with the first group that I'm working with. The farmers themselves began to identify the solutions in the space when I started sharing certain key things with them based on what the science has been noticing. They started chiming in with what they're observing. And now they understand, that's why I've been seeing this. And wait a minute, you're saying that I can use this, this, and this, but I already have this on the land. Are you saying that I can actually create this particular, let's say, vermicompost, right? Or I can do this particular form of in-field composting that is actually going to reduce my work. When I'm doing pruning exercises, I can work with that material in a particular way so that that one intelligent action and mode of working then creates all these knock-on effects for the microbiome. Are you for real? Then they begin to see possibilities and they begin to physically relax because now mentally they see the connections that were always there, but they did not recognize that this is connected to that because, as you said earlier, there's massive fragmentation that has taken place. Yes. So it's bringing the voices and experiences together to actually reconnect, remember what is already in the space that can then be leveraged to begin to heal what the damage that has been done at ground level that then is going to have a huge knock-on effect with the fermentations. Because many farmers, when I work with them, they don't realize where the microorganisms for fermentation comes from. They've been told by the experts that, oh, it's in your fermentation boxes, it's in your vessels. They are. They're on your tools, they're on your hands, they're in the air, they're everywhere. But where's all of this coming from? Especially in a farming context, it's coming from the field. And if the field is damaged, there's a knock-on effect of the populations are going to shift. What you're bringing out of the field now is going to shift what you have in your box. These organisms are not staying there just because we want them to stay there, depending on prevailing conditions, just like human populations. If I am not being well fed, if I'm not being well treated, if I'm not in an environment that allows me to thrive or even just survive, I'm not going to stick around. The system is either going to weed me out of it, I'm going to die, I'm going to become extinct, or I'm going to go into protective capsule mode, I'm going to insist, and I'm going to try to wait it out for as long as I possibly can until more suitable enabling conditions return. So it's all connected. This issue of older varieties, so varieties that would have been established, let's say 50, 60, 80, 100 years ago, when we had, colonial plantings, right? They've been noticing that those trees are consistently performing better in terms of they're still alive. They're not just struggling, they're thriving with proper care in terms of pruning management. They're producing way more fruit, okay, than expected for trees of that age, because the recommended, there are a lot of recommendations across different countries that your trees need to be replaced usually by 25, 30 years after, they've been planted. They're considered no longer viable in terms of productivity, right? So it's this establish, extract, dispose, start the cycle again. Whereas, and that has created a mindset of among many of the even with some of the older farmers, but especially the younger farmers who they consider this the holy grail of the recommendations. They're like, okay, so I'm going to have to factor into my, farm planning that I'm going to have to replace all of these trees within 25 to 30 years because that's what I've been told. And it may not be wrong. It may be very right given the context of the new hybrids. The new hybrids are the manner of propagation has an impact, okay? And now that we understand, there's growing understanding with respect to the seed microbiome. If we have been, with the seed microbiome, the seed can only inherit what the mother is able to transfer. And the mother is able to transfer only what she's able to get from the system, okay? So it's like a human mother. The human mother passes on her microbiome in several different ways to the child, okay? And it's only if that mother has been well fed, basically well treated, has had a very, very good, healthy, thriving type of pregnancy, can she actually pass on the good things to the child that then allows that child to enter the world pretty much ready to deal with the onslaught of what's around it. But because the mother's health in most of our environments, the mother's health is already compromised through what she experiences in the macro environment, but then the food that she's taking in, okay, it's not coming with the building blocks. It's not coming with the information that needs to accompany those building blocks. She cannot pass on to her offspring what she did not get. And it's the same thing in the plant world, we're realizing now. So when you look at plants that have been systematically replanted, but replanted under conditions that are not enabling for the microbiome, much less the biome, the soil biome that's going to associate with these plants. When that plant is under environmental conditions where it's actually suffering for nutrients, it means over several generations of replanting those seeds, especially in different locations, we're subtracting from what it's able to take forward and pass on to the later generations, right? And so that has huge, huge implications for what we have inherited and what we've actually managed to create because of how we've decided plants need to grow versus how plants grow versus how we think they should grow. Okay, the kind of enabling environment, right? When we were born into and we've been educated in systems that see the soil as dirt and just a matrix, just a medium rather, in which we just place these plants because we are going to feed those plants, we are going to defend those plants. We're actually, like I said before, we're adding fuel to our fire that we do not understand, that we claim we want to put out, but we're just enabling the fire and we're enabling the destruction. Yeah. So with the issue of the not just the seed microbiome, but also our method of propagating in the cacao space, most of our plantings are done through grafts to be able to produce your hybrids. Okay, you can have rooted cuttings, which is you take leaf and stem from the plant, that the desired variety, and then you basically prompt that leaf stem combination to produce roots, and then you will plant that out to give you a cacao plant that has a very different architecture from one that was grown from seed, because the one grown from seed is going to have a very upright vertical trunk, and then it's going to produce the branches, primary, secondary, tertiary, that come out at different angles, okay? With a seed grown tree, cacao tree, ideally, as long as that taproot has not been damaged during, let's say, nursery grow out, or even in the soil, if you direct seed that cacao seed, if it's in soil that has compaction that root encounters, the root is not going to go vertically down the way it should to at least 1.5 to 2.5 meters. We actually don't know what cacao is capable of because we don't grow it in enabling soil systems that allow the root, the room to go as far down as the genetics will allow. Yeah. So the root may get to, let's say, I've seen some situations where the root doesn't go past 3 inches down into the soil. The taproot, that's at least let's say maybe the taproot can be, some that I've seen, they can be at least 3 inches wide. But because the compaction is so severe, the plant is not going to prioritize energy that it does not have in trying to hammer drill down into the soil. It's going to go sideways. And so you have scenarios where very large, top-heavy trees are barely 1/2 foot into the soil. And when that happens on islands like ours that are subjected to major torrential rains, hurricanes, what's going to happen? Those trees are going to keel over, okay? And when you have systems where farmers are not pruning, adapted to not only the farmer's height to be able to comfortably harvest and safely harvest fruit so that you don't damage the flower cushions on the trunk of the tree, okay? You're talking about massively top-heavy trees that now become flags in major torrential rain, in hurricane, tropical storm situations that then create that uprooting stress. It's going to keel over. There's little to no recovery when a tree collapses like that, and you have to try to now make it vertical and hope to God that the roots are going to reestablish. But if we have not addressed the soil aggregation issue, the roots are going to continue to go sideways. So we've not addressed the literal root cause, all puns intended, but the literal root cause of the problem, we've not addressed it. We've simply we've addressed symptoms, and we continue to hope to God those symptoms hold out well beyond our lifespan and that we get great production. But the minute you affect the root feeding system of that plant, you affect everything else.
Just as chocolate is all about origin and the farms where the cacao is grown, cacao farming itself begins at the roots, begins at the soil. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Sarah. Part 2 is going to be in 2 weeks. We continue our conversation about farming, also get into some comparisons with the brewing field. We've got some experiments coming up that we are hoping to get to in the coming months involving beer cultures with cacao fermentation. Hopefully I'll have a lot more to tell you about that soon. Sarah and I are pretty excited about it. You can go back and listen to my previous conversations with Sarah. I will put links to those in the show notes. Thanks to Sarah, as always, for coming on the show, and all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.